Our topic for the next 45 minutes is the state of digital accessibility, and I'm joined today by Gareth and Ryan Graham of Texthelp. So for you, those of you who don't know, Texthelp are a software as a service company who create smart and inclusive technology to help people read, write and communicate with accuracy and fluency. Their products cover all stages of life, right from education right through to the workplace. And we've been really fortunate to work with Texthelp over the last few years, and are really pleased that Ran has joined us today to share some of his genius. Okay, so I'll maybe hand over real briefly just to Gareth and Ran, just to say a quick hi before we get stuck in.
Go ahead, Ryan, you're the guest, so you go first with the introduction there.
Well, thank you very much. You put me on the spot now, Mel, so you have with the word genius. I don't know if I can live up to that remark, but I just want to say thank you very much to both yourself and Gareth and Fathom, obviously, for having me on today. This is obviously a subject that we care deeply about at Texthelp, so I'm really excited to be able to talk to everybody about it today.
Thanks, Ryan. And I'm Gareth. I'm the CEO and founder at Fathom. And today, luckily, I'm going to do a little bit of scene setting, but then I'm going to step back and let Ryan lead the charge today. So looking forward to the session together.
Brilliant. Thank you. So yeah, as you'll see on your screen, we have a hashtag for today's webinar. It's hashtag UXBytes, and our Twitter handle is @Fathom_UX. So if you find any nuggets throughout the information we share, please do tweet us. Okay, so here's how the next 45 minutes is shaping up. Excuse me. We've got a little bit of theory to begin with to set the scene, first of all. So we're going to look at the challenging landscape of accessibility. Then we're going to dig into why accessibility is important, look at what accessibility looks like in winning teams, excuse me, and then share some tools and key takeaways. I've had barely any meetings today, so my voice is still a little bit croaky from this morning because I haven't been chatting too much. Yes, and then the last 15 minutes of our time together then will be spent in QA. So please feel free to pop your questions in the little question box just as they come to you. We might not get to all of them today, but we will do our very best, and we will follow up on our blog, which will be released early next week, and we'll respond to each of those questions there. The best way to keep in touch with us is on Twitter, so please do follow us at Fathom_UX if you don't already, and we'll post some updates there as and when that blog post is ready. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Gareth then, just to do a little bit of scene setting.
Great, thanks, Mel. And it's going to be exactly what you've outlined. The big focus just is on setting the scene. I wonder if I might just share what we have been experiencing at Fathom in terms of accessibility, just by way of setting some context for Ryan. Certainly for us, accessibility is something that we have been involved with right from our earliest days, 10 years ago. And it's something which has become increasingly important as the years have rolled by. And I think a big part of that is just because it's become an increasingly big part of how people think about the design process. And it's no longer a bit of sprinkle dust that's added on at the very end, but it's something which is embedded and thought about from the start of many or most projects. And certainly for us as UX specialists, anytime we see a successful digital project, or we see an example of something that we would say is an exemplar globally, something that sets new standards, we inevitably find that accessibility is baked into the heart of it. So we're kind of interested in the role that accessibility plays in the overall design process. And I just wanted to play back a little bit of what we have observed and what we've seen as we do that. And to kind of play some of that back, I'm going to just very briefly share some of the top line headlines, if you like, from a piece of international research which was carried out last year by an organization called Level Access. They just wanted to work out empirically. They were observing the same thing that we saw, and they wanted to understand what does the data say behind the kind of the anecdotal information that they saw. Went the wrong direction, sorry. The anecdotal information that they saw with their own eyes. So the first thing that I'll just say about the survey, I'll just tell you who it was. They spoke to lots of different organizations of lots of different shapes and sizes, from fewer than 50 people to over 50,000. They made sure that they had a good eclectic mix of people in terms of their job roles, covering legal, compliance, product owners, exec, testing, QA, UX, design, dev. So right across the whole software suite. And they looked at industries for whom digital is increasingly important, like education, tech, public sector, financial services, consumer products and services. So they spoke to nearly 1,200 people. The survey was focused around the US, about 3/4 US, but the rest was international. So one of the things that we were interested in was, what is it that's driving this interest in accessibility? And again, you can see the findings here. So there does appear to be an increasingly genuine interest in the fact that before we get anywhere near the business case or the legislation or how we do this, there's just an increasing awareness that this is the right thing to do. There's no debate around that. It's just something that we should be thinking about as we do design. But as well as that, you'll see there are other more commercial drivers there as well. There's the avoidance of legislative risk, protecting brand image, want to avoid litigation, and they're seeing other companies in their area getting sued. We'll share these stats, so they'll be available to you, but you can see that there's a mixture of risk mitigation drivers in the middle of all this. There are your legal risk drivers, and you can see some of them there. Again, just wanting to anticipate and avoid potential legislation. And then there are other risks. There are other non-legal risk drivers around the need to actually support people who suffer in this way. Another trend that we see is that increasingly organizations are getting vendor support for this, so they're not doing it alone. And again, I think that's just a reflection of a maturing marketplace and a recognition that this regularly needs specialist help. And apart from anything else, that's one of the reasons why we've invited Ryan to join us today. But you can see some of the key drivers there, which are encouraging people to engage with a vendor to help them navigate through this. And as well as that, you can see that the larger the organization, the more likely they are to engage a vendor to help them with those challenges. And just a final couple of things to say as I set the scene. Here are some of the key accessibility challenges that come out of the report. And again, those will be very consistent with what we're seeing on the ground. So the desire to incorporate accessibility earlier in the development lifecycle so that it's not an afterthought. The need for training so that artifacts developed as part of that process are good to go without the need for a sort of a retrofit in terms of accessibility. Investment in time for a really big one, access to users who have disabilities. So we're not testing by proxy, we're testing directly with the people for whom this legislation has been put in place and these principles exist. And then finally, process, just managing a whole eclectic mix of content creators and the challenges that come with that. So I think the big challenge that I want to leave you with as I hand over to Ryan is just this recognition that accessibility is perhaps a little bit like going to the gym. It's something that we probably all agree is a good idea, but that doesn't mean that we all necessarily get there. And I think the big thing that we hope that we take away, that you take away today, is that it's something that we can all and should all be involved with, and we hope we kind of encourage you or compel you to turn your motivations into actions. So that's a little bit of scene setting from the research. Those are some of the findings of the survey. And with no further ado, having kind of painted a little bit of a picture, I'll ask Ryan now to come and colour some of it in for us. Ryan.
Great, thank you very much, Gareth. So just before we touch on why accessibility is important, I kind of just wanted to start off with a few definitions, because we're going to be using some terms today everybody might be familiar with and some terms people might not be familiar with. So I want to start off with a definition of the word disabled. Whenever I use the word disabled in the following slides, I'm going to talk about it in two ways. Whenever I'm talking about statistics on data, specifically from the government and ONS, whenever I use the word disabled, I'll be talking about the actual definition of that word underneath the UK Equality Act 2010. I'll also be using the word disabled people. And whenever I say that, I'm going to take a cue from somebody I heard speak recently from Content Design London. She put it in a really, really good way whenever I say disabled people, not people who have a disability, but people who have been disabled by the websites or the software that they use. And I think that's a really important distinction as well, because there are things that we can do to remove that disability as UX leaders, developers, and designers as well. Second of all, obviously the term accessibility itself, really, really widely encompassing term. It takes in an awful lot of things. But whenever I talk about accessibility, I like to think of it as any technique or techniques which make content available to all users. And that obviously goes for UX, and that obviously goes for design, but also development as well. And It's a very wide encompassing term, as I say. So I want to try and break the word accessibility down into two different types of accessibility. I like to think of it as technical accessibility, which is things that developers and UX designers can do to make a website or product more accessible. So things like screen reader support and complying to the web content accessibility guidelines, things like that I term as technical accessibility. And there's also another layer called content accessibility. And that's not the technical aspects of it, but the actual words that you're writing for your audience and the content that goes into your website and your product, making sure that it is appropriate and understandable by your audience as well. And I'll touch on that there a little bit later. But back to the start, why is accessibility important? Very simply, because it's the right thing to do. That is the bottom line here. What we're trying to do with accessibility is we want to make sure that everybody is not denied access to information in any way, regardless of what needs they have and to be able to access that. They should be able to access it in the same way for absolutely everybody, because access to products and access to websites and information, it really is in the modern era a fundamental right, and that makes it the right thing to do. Having said that, as Gareth touched on, we all know that it's the right thing to do, and that's not really how the world works sometimes. And so what I want to do next is talk about the business case for accessibility and how you can sell that within your own organizations. So in the UK alone, there are over 14 million people what's described as a limiting long-term illness, impairment, or disability. And that includes 19% of all working age adults are disabled. So that is 1/5 of your users have some form of disability. If your website or your product is inaccessible, you could be turning away that number of people. So that should be a really easy sell within your organization. If you said, if you don't do this here, you're going to drop 20% of your entire traffic to your website, that's something you should absolutely action. And it says that 19% of all working age adults are disabled. This is very highly dependent, obviously, on your sector. But if you consider pension age adults as well, that percentage very nearly doubles. So depending on your sector, it really is almost a minimum of 19% of your entire addressable market. So that's a very, those figures are a very direct thing that you can use to measure whether or not you think accessibility should be a priority, because it absolutely should be. And what I want to talk about next as well is around that content accessibility that I talked about. So a quick question for everybody, maybe we can get a little poll on the go here. What does everybody think that the average reading age of a person in the UK is? It's always a really good question to ask because people go both ways. So I'm going to give everybody a couple of seconds just to have a think about that. And perhaps Gareth and Mel can let me know whenever all the votes are in. And I can do a grand reveal at the end.
No problem. We'll do. Ryan, can you see the results as they come in, or do you need me to share the results with you?
You probably need to share the results with me. I can't see them here.
That's no problem. I'll give folks another 15 seconds, and then I'll let you know the results as they've come in.
Excellent. 15 seconds. Give me another chance to hydrate then.
Okay, Ryan, here are the answers that come in, and I'll just go up through the age ranges, and I'll give you the percentages. So we had 5 votes for age 9, that's 13% of people. 5 votes for age 10, unsurprisingly, also 13. 9 votes for 11, 23%. The most votes was for 12, that was 13 votes or 33%. 2 people said 13, 5%. 4 people said 14, 10%. No one went for 15, and 2 people went for 16 at 5%. So most people, a third of people, voted for age 12.
That sounds about right, and that's pretty much what we see as well across the board whenever we ask this question. So well done to, I can't remember, was it 5 people who said 9 years old. 9 years old is the average reading age of a person in the UK. So whenever you're writing content for your website or your product, that is the demographic that you need to be writing content for. That's what you should be aiming for. And you know, that is a completely different aspect to the technical accessibility. That is, you know, not writing something to some defined guidelines. It can be a difficult thing to do, but what you need to do is you need to place yourself in the position of your users, not as the person who's writing the content or designing the content for your own website. You know, if you make your content too complicated to read, your customers are going to have issues understanding and reading that content, and they will go somewhere else. Now, unfortunately, the internet is a very big place, and you have much more competitors than you ever have had before. If your customers find it difficult to read and understand your website or read and understand your products, they will leave, and they will go to another organization or another company that produces content that they can understand and they can read. And not only that, whenever they find somewhere that, you know, speaks to their abilities and gives them the ability to be able to navigate the website easily and with their assistive technology software if required, they will repeatedly go back to that same place, safe in the knowledge that they can navigate the website, they can understand the website, and then they can interact with it. So that perception is absolutely everything. And if you omit that 1/5 of that customer base, you're just completely disregarding them, and you're disregarding the ability for them to come back to your product and come back to your website as well. So I think that's a very compelling business case for anybody, really. And last, but absolutely by no means least, as Gareth, you had mentioned here before, legislation. Legislation these days is largely for the public sector whenever it comes to accessibility. This is a quote from the public sector body's accessibility regulations of 2018. You must make your website or mobile app more accessible by making it perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So again, the terms perceivable and understandable in there really relates to that content accessibility, and operable and robust really relate to that technical accessibility. So you can see how you can't just pick one or the other. They really have to go hand in hand if you were to make your website properly accessible. So as I mentioned, this here really largely relates to the public sector at the moment. And some of the stats you had, Gareth, as well on that previous screen about the risk people felt about this legislation coming into play for private sector, that must be fairly high. And if it's not fairly high, they should expect it to be fairly high, because, you know, momentum is going with the private sector. It is building, and it is going to get to the point where the legislation comes over from the public sector and into the private sector. That's going to happen, in my opinion, fairly quickly. And you want to be ahead of the game on that. You don't want to have that legislation be around the corner, and then it's panic stations trying to rewrite your content, redesign your applications, your websites. That is not a position that you want to put yourself in. So it's much better to be prepared for when that inevitably does happen. So hopefully that outlines the business cases at a very high level. But then who takes ownership of accessibility in winning teams? So in my opinion, accessibility is everyone's responsibility. Everybody can have some sort of input into accessibility, but leadership in your organization must be the driver for that. If you can move on to the next slide there for me, Gareth. Thank you. Everybody is, sorry, the previous slide there before the demo.
Sorry, no problem.
Thank you. Everyone is responsible for accessibility in their own way, but you absolutely need high-level buy-in, senior leadership, UX leadership to be able to support that. It doesn't happen organically. It will not happen on its own. You need somebody in your organization that sets down a plan, make sure it is an objective and an achievable one, and that they drive that within that organization. And it should be clear now as well to anybody who is a leader on this call that the business cases in those previous slides should explain to senior leadership in organizations, you know, how accessibility can grow your business and how you can help your customers achieve that goal of, the fundamental right of being able to use your website or your product. And then following on from that it will improve your business value. And particularly as well, UX is so key in this entire process. UX and UI designers, they're responsible for so many aspects of technical and content accessibility. So things like whenever it comes to design, colors and contrasts, usage of fonts as well, obviously in our designs, and then simplified design and UI, and monitoring drop-offs as well on your product, on your website. And then crucially, as you touched on before, Gareth, user groups and feedback and personas. That is your core customer base, and you are interacting with them, at a base level, and you're at the right position, in the right position to be able to get feedback from that 20% of your customer base. So UX really does play a massive part in this. So as I mentioned before, having senior leadership buy-in is really key. And a good thing to sort of communicate this with the organization is having a plan of how you can improve accessibility, because accessibility doesn't happen overnight. It's not something you can just click your fingers and yes, we're accessible, great, job done. It's also something that evolves over time. So having that plan is key. And that's something we've developed here at Texthelp just recently. So this is our 10-point plan at Texthelp. Now, I'm not going to go into the detail on it. There's a lot there. You can read more about it at texthelp.com/journey. But this is a very high level 10 points to improve accessibility throughout our entire business. Each one of these points involves somebody across the entire organization. It could be somebody in development, it could be somebody in HR, as well as somebody in design, UX. It helps communicate how we want to improve our accessibility throughout the entire organization. And this plan is driven by senior management. So they say, these are the things that we want to achieve. Here is how we're going to achieve them. Because accessibility, it can be a very long journey, and it can seem like a very daunting task as well at the start, if there's something you've never really considered before, from the ground up. But if you have small, measurable, and definable steps to be able to improve it, you're going to find it much easier to progress. You're going to, see the rewards as well on your way through that journey to the ultimate goal of making your website more accessible to everybody who needs to be able to access it. So that's an overview of our 10-point plan. And one of the things I want to discuss about how you can achieve some of those is about the usage of partnerships and tools. So obviously accessibility itself is a very difficult thing to understand. So bringing in that knowledge is really key. And like I said before, UX leaders, like people on this call, have a really unique position. You have the opportunity to use diverse and representatives, user groups, and personas that can really help drive that business value. Yes, it is difficult, absolutely, but it is really important that you put the effort in and at those levels to be able to get that feedback. You can gather genuinely critical feedback from people who actually have these issues on a day-to-day basis. They know what the pain points are. They know what things need to be done to make a website accessible or that could help them in their day-to-day lives. And if you get their opinion right from the start, you're going to have a much better foundation to be able to build your product or your website on from an accessibility point of view. I mean, that not only is obviously the right thing to do for your product, but that will also give you a huge competitive advantage as well. A lot of organizations are not doing this. And if you get it on the ground level on this, that will give you an advantage of your competitors and bring those people into your product and bring those people to your website and make them stay there as well. But accessibility, it can be hard, absolutely, especially whenever it's something you haven't really done before. But there's a huge amount of experts out there, and a lot, especially nowadays, a lot of tools out there as well to help you achieve accessibility and achieve your accessibility goals. And that's why at Texthelp here, we built a product called ReachDeck, or I should say a suite of products called ReachDeck. It helps to enforce accessibility across an entire organization by providing solutions for both the technical aspects of accessibility, and that is things like WCAG guidelines and providing reports as well to your senior management, and also the content accessibility as well. So providing measurements for the words that you write for your website, telling you that your reading age is too high or too low. And then critically, it monitors those changes. So it constantly watches your website for any new accessibility errors that have crept in the process, any words that have maybe slipped by a content review. It continuously checks your website and flags those errors. And at the end of that process, it produces a report that you can bring back to senior management to say, this is how far along we are in our plan. These are the areas that we need to improve upon. And these are the issues that have cropped up since the last time we started looking at accessibility. And that is a really, really good way to not only sort of get the organization involved, but communicate accessibility at an organizational level. And that is the end of my slides, minus one extra slide on the end for the takeaways, actually. So 5 key takeaways from this today. The first one, and the most important one by a long way, is that making your website accessible is the right thing to do. It is a fundamental right for everybody to have the same access as another person to be able to access your product on your website. So that is the goal. That is what you're trying to achieve. And how you try to achieve that can take many different forms, but that's what you need to keep front of mind. The second one, to be able to get buy-in for that, disabled users could account for up to 22% of your total user base. So cutting those users out is not just preventing them from being able to access the information they need, but taking that user base away from your product or your website. The third one, obviously legislation as well, that is changing fast, changing rapidly. Thinking, oh, let's worry about it in a year's time would not be a good strategy. You need to consider that now because that will happen, and it will happen very quickly. Number 4, plan your journey. It really is, it can be a long way to improving your accessibility, but being able to define those points and using those business cases to get organizational buy-in will make this so much easier for you. And number 5, leaving this on, UX leaders in particular are uniquely positioned. I mean, everybody who is involved in the UX process and the development process, you all will have a key part to play, whether it's technical accessibility for WCAG guidelines, whether it's content accessibility, writing the content for your website, or whether it's those creating personas that represent disabled users, or creating user groups that are diverse and represent those disabled users. That is going to be absolutely key and be able to improve your accessibility for an organization.
Super, thank you so much. Ryan, I'm just getting on top of some of the questions that are coming in thick and fast. So I think we're just about bang on time. So we'll spend the next 15 minutes just going through some of these questions, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
So the first one is for you, Gareth, just to give Ryan a wee breather. And it comes in from Martin. So Martin says the impact of disability ranges massively from person to person. Given how hard it is to attract disabled participants for user testing, how do you recommend teams avoid the trap of assuming?
Yeah, no problem, Mel. And Ryan's touched a number of times on the overlap between some of the focus that he would have in his role and accessibility, and some of the stuff we would focus on in the world of user experience. And if we were to draw the Venn diagram, there's a big overlap between those two circles. And I think one of the things that's in that overlap is the danger of making assumptions. So Martin's question really gets to the heart of the matter here, which is the importance of not seeking to design or speak on behalf of someone who you haven't had the humility to understand, or whose shoes you need to put yourself in. So I think the question is a really good one. And I think Martin's hinted at some of the answer in his question. So certainly, Martin, you've suggested there is that getting around as many participants as possible definitely gives you a rounded view. We would definitely agree with that. I think there's a couple of other elements to it though, which are maybe worth mentioning. I think the next thing we'd maybe mention is that a nice combination of qualitative and quantitative can really help. So you can understand your users not purely by individually speaking to them on a one-to-one basis. So there's a whole groundswell of information and research already available. So there's lots of medical and analytical data that's available that helps us understand those people's worlds better just by embracing the data. So speaking to people one-to-one isn't the only means by which we can get our hands on this. And I think the second thing that I would mention then relates to the data is tools. So tools also can give us really brilliant head starts in understanding what a website, an app, a digital product looks like through the eyes, through the ears of people who are living with these various conditions. So yeah, speak to as many people as you can, but you don't purely get your insight from speaking to people one-to-one. There's other ways you can get it.
Super, thank you, Gareth. And the next one is for you, Ryan. So Harry says, hi, I'm a UX writer. Can you suggest any good accessibility courses?
Can I suggest any courses? So in terms of training and courses and things like that, we've worked quite closely with a company called AbilityNet in the UK, and they provide a wide range of training, a wide range of courses for all different types of accessibility, both digital and non-digital. And they even have free courses available as well. So they're absolutely an excellent organization to be able to reach out to for all sorts of accessibility training. And that's a really good question as well, by the way, because that is somebody who, you know, realizes that they need an expert to be able to coach them through that process. And that is absolutely vital to be able to reach out to those people, those experts in the field. So it's good to see that question.
Super, thank you. And Ran, another one for you, if that's okay, comes in from Tony. So Tony asks, has the average reading age of 9 years old in the UK been regularly consistent for the past number of years? Or are there any trends to show that the average reading age is increasing or decreasing over time?
That is an excellent question. To my knowledge, Tony, the statistics that we have only been measured recently and only been measured once and not on a consistent basis. I would be very surprised if that was a static figure. And I would also be very surprised if it didn't go in the down direction rather than the up direction. And I would say it probably correlates with the amount of adults that are, label themselves as disabled, which does increase on a yearly basis, usually by about 1 or 2% actually. But that is a very good question, particularly over the past year or so. I think we will see, specifically obviously in earlier years and education systems, with the challenges they faced over the past year, remotely, teaching kids at home and trying to get them up to the speed of their peers whenever some people have access to equipment and some people don't have access to the equipment. I would imagine over the course of the next couple of years, we are going to see that come through in these statistics. I think kids will eventually start to struggle to keep up, particularly with the reading.
Yeah, and I wonder, Mel, if I could maybe just add to that, if I may, just I'm going to say the same thing as Ryan, but just through a UX lens. I mean, for us, if you look at any successful digital innovation or any platforms that gain proper cut through. I mean, the one I'm certainly thinking of is gov.uk. They were very, very clear about the reading age that they were writing for. And I mean, if you look at their numbers, which I use all the time, 600 public services in the UK are available through it. Customer satisfaction is 88.8%. Every 100 times a public service is accessed in the UK, 79 times it's done through gov.uk. So there is a really close correlation between understandable English, writing in a way that users understand, and having a system that does and performs what you want. So, the UX and accessibility are happy bedfellows in that sense.
Brilliant, thanks both. Okay, another one here from Louise. So I'll put it out to both of you, and you can fight over who answers it. So Louise says, really enjoyed the presentation. It's refreshing to hear that when we strip it all back to see those 5 key takeaway points. The question she asks is, do you have a starter pack for businesses to relate to WCAG 2.1 and that are NI focused so that teams are not overwhelmed?
That is a really good point. It can seem like a real overwhelming process at the start. For us at Texthelp, what we do with the Reach Deck actually is we simplify the WCAG guidelines as much as possible. And whenever we're scanning a website, we'll collate all the errors so that sometimes if you're scanning a website and it's a big website, you could see thousands of errors and it's a bit, it's a thousand things for me to do. But really, if you boil it down, some of them are repetitive, some of them are very easy fixes as well, very easy to do. So we do actually change the terminology of the WCAG to make it a little bit more readable and a little bit more user-friendly as well. Because obviously, from our point of view, we're considering the UX of the people trying to fix the UX through accessibility. So that is a really key piece to it as well. But absolutely, again, there are some good training materials out there for WCAG. In fact, the Web Accessibility Initiative website itself, the people who run the WCAG guidelines, they have some really, really good sort of initial starter steps to introduce you to WCAG, what it means, and really an overview of the rules. And I find that that's a very, very good place to start and a very easy place to get started for WCAG in particular.
Yeah, I don't have much to add there, Mel. I'd concur with what Ryan said in terms of using the resources that are already available. We don't, Fathom doesn't have that starter pack, but as Ryan says, there's lots of really good resources available on the more formal and official websites. Again, I think our experience on the accessibility audit work that we would do would again align with what Ryan says. We often find that the number of errors or issues can be in the hundreds or the thousands, but when you boil them down, they relate to a handful of templates, easy fixes, and actually you can very quickly reduce that number from a large number to a much, much smaller manageable number. So very similar experiences to what Ryan's just outlined.
Super, thank you. Okay, so maybe take another one here. So let's see. Yes, so questioning, I think this one's maybe for you, Ryan. At what point in the development process would you recommend incorporating accessibility requirements?
Whenever you get up in the morning and walk over to your computer, that is the point in the process where you consider the accessibility requirements, and you need to think about them up front. But it's easy for me to say, especially if you're looking at a new product as well. That's easy to say from this position. And the earlier in the process that you think about those accessibility requirements, the easier it will be to implement them. If you're building a new product and you decide that, yes, I'm going to make this WCAG 2.1 compliant, AA standard, you understand the standards, you get the training up front, it will be so much easier from a development standpoint to develop to those standards. If you have something already in place and you have to retrospectively go back and try to fix it, that is a much bigger task. And that's another thing as well you could probably take as a business case, is that if you think of accessibility as an afterthought, it will cost much more in develop to go back and try to fix it than it would have if you understood the guidelines at the start and implemented it in your process as you go along. At Texthelp, obviously, as a software development company, we run agile sprints, and accessibility will be included in every between 2 and 4 week sprint for us in the sprint planning. Every feature that we look to build in incorporates accessibility at that point. Can we build this feature? And if we are going to build this feature, how do we make sure that it's accessible for these users? Building the user stories into that as well. If you can do it at that point, that is the best place to do it, right at the start. I understand that's not an option for everybody, but it is the best place for it.
Brilliant, thanks for that. And there's just one more that has just come in that I think we might be able to cover off. And again, it might be one for you, Ryan. So sorry. So it comes in from anonymous attendee, and I ask, does accessibility tie into SEO in any way?
It's a really good observation, excellent observation, and yes, it absolutely does. And technical accessibility in particular. So if you structure your website in such a way that there are no headings and there are no paragraphs and there are no images or captions for videos, and not only is somebody with, for example, a screen reader going to have some severe difficulties navigating and understanding that website, search engines are not going to be able to index that data effectively. They're not going to be able to pull in the structure of the page. They're not going to pull in, you know, text representations of a lot of images on the page or text representations of video on the page as well. So you get a double benefit there. You get the double benefit of making it more accessible and improving your SEO at the same time. So that is absolutely a win-win. Really good observation.
Super. Brilliant. Thank you. And thank you everyone for all your great questions. I know there's a couple there that we didn't quite get to answer. So please keep an eye out for the blog, and we will get to each of those and publish those questions and answers. Okay, so just a few things to close off then. We have our next webinar in the diary. It is on the 8th of September, and we are talking all things content and how to drive engagement, conversion and retention through content. So we'd love to see you all there. We're going to launch sign-ups just hot off the heels of this webinar, so please keep an eye out on Twitter for that. Also, folks, we'll follow up with a survey today. So if you can spare 3 minutes, we'd really love to hear your feedback and thoughts on what content you would like us to cover in the future. So yeah, that's us for today. Thanks very much to Ryan and Gareth and everyone who joined us. Hope you all have a lovely rest of afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Mel. Thanks, everybody. All the best.
Bye-bye.